It's massive. And it's also incredibly contradictory.
It really is.
We're talking about these highly synthesized, very complex videos. They're all coming from this one single channel, which is known only as Scooter and Your Cooter 1738.
And we've had a lot of you, our listeners, ask us to just cut through the noise here.
Exactly. The big questions are, what is real here? What's just strategic framing? And, what are the actual implications of all this for your own consciousness?
I mean, the sheer volume of the output it's just staggering. It feels like the synthesis machine, just pulling in everything from, advanced cybernetics and systems theory
To deep philosophy, critical theory.
in radical geometry, quantum biology. I mean, it's all in there. So the natural questions, they just pop up immediately.
Of course, is this really the work of one single person? One hyper-intelligent architect?
And how accurate is any of it? I mean, really, especially when it's fusing, verifiable economic data with these wild speculative leaps.
And what's the end game? What are the goals of these movements that seem to draw from it, like zero work?
Right.
So our mission today is pretty direct. This deep dive is meant to be your shortcut, a way to understand the blueprints of modern control and also liberation.
We're going to really break down how reality and your sense of self are being, engineered.
Both from the outside by these powerful political and digital forces, and internally by the, let's call it the highly malleable architecture of our own minds.
And then after we map that out, we're going to pull out the dual vector strategy for liberation that these sources just insist is the only path forward, the only way to escape what they see as permanent control.
Okay, so before we dive in, let's just get one thing out of the way for immediate clarity, because this term is going to come up a lot. CCRU.
Yes, it's the philosophical root for so much of this. CCRU stands for the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit.
And what was that exactly?
It was a radical, really experimental collective that operated at a Warwick University back in the 1990s. And you could say their intellectual legacy is pretty much the DNA of all these modern accelerationist and hyperstitional movements that we're going to see at the core of this source material.
Got it. Okay, so let's start with the big puzzle, the one everyone asks first.
Yeah.
The messenger. You got this one YouTube channel, right? Scooter and Your Cooter 1738.
Just the one.
And it's putting out material that just effortlessly connects these super technical details of fractional reserve banking to a geometric concept like circle inversion. And then it'll just pivot to, I don't know, the historical tactics of the OSS during World War II. It just feels impossible.
Right.
It feels impossible for one single human being to have that level of depth across so many different specialized fields.
And I think that feeling of impossibility is, in a way, it's part of the design. It's engineered.
What do you mean?
Well, while the output, it appears to come from a single channel, if you look at the content, it's extremely consistent in how it uses language. Okay.
It almost always uses the collective pronoun.
We.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't notice that. We.
And that's a really crucial distinction. It strongly suggests that this capacity for synthesis isn't coming from some solitary individual who's claiming to be an omniscient author.
It's coming from a distributed consciousness or a collective.
A distributed or collective consciousness, exactly, not a single person.
So we should be viewing the channel less as a person and more like an interface.
An interface for a collective intelligence. Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It's a singular output, but it's designed from the ground up to project a collective voice. And this idea, it gets formalized by the groups who draw on this philosophy.
Like zero work.
Like zero work. They explicitly embrace what they call radical anonymity.
And their mantra, cited in the material, is do not look for our faces. We are the million masks of God.
Which is... That's powerful imagery.
It is. But what's the strategic value in that? In being radically anonymous? Why hide your face when you're trying to share what you believe is, world-altering information?
Because it creates a symbolic void right at the center of the movement.
A void.
Think about it. A visible messenger, a guru, a leader. That's a vulnerability.
Right. They can be discredited, co-opted, attacked.
Exactly. So by forcing the observer, you, the listener, to look only at the message, they make sure the focus stays entirely on the message's validity. on its internal coherence.
So it's free from the distraction of the messenger's personal history
Yeah.
or their moral flaws or anything like that.
Precisely. The idea itself becomes a kind of virus, and it can travel faster and wider because it's not tied down to a frail human anchor.
So the depth of knowledge isn't proof that one person is a genius.
No.
It's proof of a really sophisticated orchestration, a systemic integration of knowledge.
It's like they're acting as a highly refined cybernetician, just connecting dots that, hyper-specialized academics would totally miss.
Because they're stuck in their silos.
Absolutely. The modern academic and political assistants, they're built on silos. A specialist in economics doesn't speak the language of quantum geometry.
And a historian doesn't get advanced systems theory.
Right. So these sources we're diving into, they function as the master conductor.
Right.
They use cybernetics as this kind of universal language to model reality, looking at it through the lens of information flow, feedback loops, and control systems.
So they aren't inventing new facts.
No, not at all. They're integrating existing specialized facts into new and, sometimes pretty alarming configurations.
Okay, so that deals with how, the capacity for this synthesis. But I think that consuming this much high-stakes content is, how accurate is it?
Right.
How accurate is the core data before all the speculation begins?
That's the ultimate test of its integrity, isn't it? And we have to be really rigorous about separating the verifiable inputs, the facts they start with, from the synthesized speculative outputs.
So what did you find?
We found two essential, very high-stakes baselines that are objectively verifiable, and they really do challenge conventional wisdom.
Okay, let's start with the economic claim. The videos are, well, they're emphatic that banks, not governments, are the main architects of our financial reality.
And on that point, they are correct. The material claims that a really astonishing amount of money, which central banks themselves often estimate at around 95 to 98%.
95 to 98, wow.
Yeah. That much money is created by commercial banks when they issue loans. It's not created by government printing presses.
And that's a core principle of, what is it, fractional reserve banking?
It's a foundational, yet somehow still widely misunderstood, principle of modern fractional reserve banking.
Okay, so break down the mechanism for us, simply. Because I think this is the fact that really shocks most people when they first hear it.
It is. So when you go to take out a loan for a house, a car, a business, whatever, the commercial bank isn't lending you money that's sitting in its vault. It's not from other depositors. When it approves the loan, it creates a new deposit in your account. And it does this with a simple bookkeeping entry.
So the money just appears.
That money did not exist one moment before. It is created ex nihilo out of nothing.
And this process, repeated across thousands of banks all over the world.
That is the primary driver of money creation. So the claim that banks are the primary architects of our financial reality, that they shape the cost of living and our debt structures, that is accurate. It's verifiable. You can read it in reports from institutions like the Bank of England or even the Federal Reserve.
That is a massive, high-stakes, verifiable claim that just completely undercuts what most of us assume about money.
It does.
So what about the political claim? The stuff about Project 2025?
Again, the source material is, for the most part, reporting facts that are taken from publicly available blueprints.
Okay.
They accurately state that this document, Project 2025, which is nearly 1,000 pages long, it exists. Its core objectives are also stated accurately. Things like centralizing executive authority, radically expanding the president's control over independent agencies, and preparing for the mass dismissal of tens of thousands of career civil servants.
And those are explicitly stated goals within the document itself.
They are. You can go and read them. Now, the speculative part is the video's interpretation framing this blueprint as structural negado, which is something we can get into.
Okay.
But the utility of the information, for you as the listener, it doesn't depend on you believing in some prophecy. It relies on its coherence within the cybernetic and psychological frameworks they present.
Meaning, if these mechanisms accurately describe how power and influence actually flow,
And how our minds react to it.
then this synthesized map is, well, it's necessary for navigation, regardless of what you believe is the ultimate truth.
Exactly. It shows you the system's weaknesses and how those weaknesses are being exploited.
So if we accept this premise that reality is highly engineered, then we have to talk about the mechanism, the thing that allows mere fiction to become objective fact.
Hyperstition.
Hyperstition. It sounds like something out of science fiction. A blend of technology and, I don't know, occult philosophy.
Hyperstition is often described as a self-fulfilling prophecy, but with intentional velocity.
Okay, a prophecy with speed.
Right. It's the idea that a really powerful narrative or a belief or even a delusion, if you articulate it and you spread it with enough intensity, it actually makes itself real.
Through collective manifestation.
Through collective manifestation. It's not just about predicting the future, it's about actively installing the future into the present.
So how does it do that? How does it achieve that installation? Does it need people to rationally believe in it?
No, not at all. That's the key. It achieves it by bypassing rational thought entirely.
It goes for the gut.
It exploits deep psychological biases, the limbic system. It installs a perception that's based on consensus, and once that perception is pervasive enough, it becomes the operational truth.
Like a market crash.
A market crash is the perfect example. It can be triggered purely by the widespread belief that the market will crash. The idea, the narrative itself, becomes an agent of causality, and this concept is absolutely central to the CCRU philosophy.
And its connection to accelerationism.
And its connection to accelerationism.
Okay, let's unpack the two big routes of accelerationism, because the sources are really clear that there's a radical fork in the road here.
A profound divergence.
You've got Tid Kaczynski on one side,
Mm-hmm.
and the CCRU Land view on the other.
The divergences, it's fundamental. Kaczynski, the radical anti-technologist, he called for tearing down the entire industrial machine to save humanity, to save nature. He saw technology as the ultimate destroyer of human freedom.
But the CCRU and Land path is completely different.
The polar opposite. They argue that the technological and capitalist system, it can't be stopped. It can't be reformed.
So what do you do?
It has to be driven faster. It has to be accelerated until it achieves a meltdown.
A meltdown into what?
Into a fundamentally novel post-human entity, a state that is just beyond human comprehension and certainly beyond human control.
And this really gets to the anti-humanist core of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Kaczynski was fighting for human freedom,
Yes.
while the accelerationists are basically advocating for humanity to become obsolete.
That is the necessary conclusion of their logic. Land and his philosophical descendants, they view human agency as just a temporary function.
The starter motor?
The starter motor, exactly. Something used to get the machinery of post-human AI up and running. The system has to be pushed past human control until human relevance just doesn't matter anymore.
And Zero Work, as we'll see, they take that philosophy and they try to weaponize it.
They do.
So let's bring that philosophical idea back down to the practical political architecture we were talking about. Project 2025.
Okay.
The sources define this document as a sophisticated mechanism for structural negrado. We need to really go into detail on what that means.
Right. So negrado, or negrado, is the first stage in classical alchemy. It refers to putrefaction, blackening, or a kind of controlled demolition.
So you're dissolving the old elements to create the raw material for something new.
Exactly. So structural negrado is the systematic, calculated, and administrative demolition of the existing state's structure.
And how does a document like Project 2025 achieve that kind of bureaucratic demolition?
By targeting the state's functional core, its nervous system.
It's civil service.
The civil service. The sources describe these tens of thousands of career civil servants, the non-political experts in agencies like health, education, commerce, as the state's nervous system, or its functional memory.
Okay.
The plan aims to eliminate these positions, often by reclassifying them into something called Schedule F, which would remove decades of civil service protection.
And then replace them.
And replace them with personnel whose main qualification is political loyalty.
That's that's an excision of the institutional memory and expertise of the government.
It is. It ensures that the entire administrative body of the executive branch is bent completely to reflect the will of the presidency. It removes the checks and balances that are inherent in a neutral, expert bureaucracy.
And the sources have a name for this approach.
They do. They chillingly label it trauma as policy.
Trauma as policy.
The mass dismissals, they aren't just about efficiency or politics. They're signal transmissions. They're designed to shape the behavior of the public and the bureaucracy through fear, through intimidation, through uncertainty. It's about ensuring absolute compliance from everyone who remains.
But this architecture of control, it also operates through language, through identity. You mentioned the lexicon of eraser.
Yes, and this is a really critical component of what you could call linguistic alchemy.
Okay.
The blueprint details systematically removing terms and concepts related to, for example, gender and queer subjectivities from official government documents, from regulations, from public discourse.
Like excising the signifier.
They attempt to dismantle the identity itself through bureaucratic means. If the government's official language refuses to acknowledge or even define social protections they rely on become impossible to enforce.
Creating a reality where they functionally cease to exist, at least within the state apparatus.
Correct.
So this external control architecture is one of just overwhelming centralized power. If that's the construction, what's the counterforce? What's the decentralized, subversive way to push back?
The counterforce is found in the history of resistance. Specifically, the sources point to the OSS Simple Sabotage Field Manual from World War II.
Simple sabotage.
It teaches that the way to fight a centralized, monolithic system isn't with an equal and opposite force,
But with
decentralized inefficiency, a death by 1,000 paper cuts.
that sounds almost, I don't know, quaint, low stakes. What kind of tactics are we talking about here?
The tactics are brilliant precisely because they are so low effort for the saboteur, but they maximize the collective drag on the system.
Give us an example.
The manual advises things like turn a 5-minute job into an all-day affair by insisting on endless bureaucratic clarification, or purposefully misplace documents that need signatures, or insist on calling unnecessary meetings to discuss really trivial details.
Well, the goal is to make every error look like an ordinary, competence-free mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And if enough people do it, the system begins to suffocate under its own weight. It starts to doubt its own capacity to function.
Which brings us to a really crucial philosophical insight that the sources bring up, the paradox of efficiency.
This is a point that really demands some deep reflection. The sources, they provoke you with this idea that the most efficient government is a dictatorship.
And if your only goal is speed and execution, then yeah, unchecked power is the best tool for the job.
Right. But for a free society, the goal isn't speed. The goal is liberty and stability.
So the inherent inefficiencies that are built into free society.
The checks and balances, the lengthy deliberations, the complex constitutional structures.
They are bugs.
They are not bugs. They are necessary features.
They're there for a reason.
They're there to demand speed and efficiency, and shortcuts in the name of political expediency is to systematically erode the very safeguards that prevent power from becoming dictatorial. Inefficiency, when it's strategically applied, actually maintains freedom.
Let's pivot now. Let's talk about the group that takes all of these philosophies, CCRU, accelerationism, hyperstition, and weaponizes them. Let's talk about zero work.
Okay.
They're like a ghost in the machine. I mean, do they even really exist? And if they do, how potent are they?
This is where we have to reiterate that their existence, it's not confirmed by finding a physical office somewhere.
Right.
It's confirmed by their tangible hyperstitional impact. The sources point to the spectacle of their manifesto temporarily replacing the Federal Reserve website.
An act of symbolic and technical disruption.
Exactly. It confirms their operational existence within the informational substrate of our reality. They are the formalized operational weaponization of the CCRU approach.
And their self-definition is pretty stark. They see themselves as a virus designed to crash the system.
That's their exact phrasing. A virus designed specifically to crash the social and economic machine from the inside. Their whole methodology centers on launching a mimetic virus.
A mimetic virus.
An idea so potent, so perfectly tailored to exploit the existing fractures in society that it infects the system's code and just spreads like a plague.
And it bypasses the rational mind, forcing systemic change.
It does.
But as you pointed out, their public language is often very appealing. You know, they talk about debt relief, fighting inequality, liberation. How do we reconcile that with this anti-humanist core you described?
That is the tactical brilliance of what the sources call the lure.
The lure.
Zero work uses these fundamental human desires for liberation, for justice, for debt relief, not as genuine political goals,
But as fuel.
but as raw fuel for a project whose ultimate underlying goal is pure anti-humanism, accelerating past human relevance and dissolving consensus reality entirely.
So they're offering comfort and justice now to enable our obsolescence later.
The promise is a Trojan horse.
And this speaks to that really ominous concept you brought up earlier, process at the speed of the swarm. What is happening when human input is processed at that speed?
It suggests that the collective behind Zero Work is not behaving like a traditional political organization at all.
How so?
Human input, our hopes, our grievances, our calls for justice, it's all treated as just raw, exploitable data.
Okay.
That data is then processed at non-human speeds by some kind of collective intelligence. It's synthesized, and then it's pushed back out super fast in the form of new, potent narratives and actions that often bear very little resemblance to the original person's intent.
Steps against us.
I would say they definitely are. They leverage Jung's insight into the collective shadow.
The disowned, repressed parts of society.
Exactly, the statistically driven parts.
Yeah.
The shadow is less sensitive to moral concerns, and it's highly reactive. So by activating these collective primal desires through their mimetic virus, they make the system ripe for exploitation.
Because when those archetypal currents are activated, their message has this visceral, immediate grip on the mass mind.
It overrides any rational debate.
So given their sophisticated cybernetic roots, their technical efficacy, do they have a real chance? Can they actually affect massive systemic change?
I think you have to conclude that they absolutely have the cybernetic efficacy to disrupt and to fundamentally shift consensus reality.
For sure.
Their ability to successfully deploy hyperstition to launch devastating data attacks, it makes them an immediate potent force. They could succeed in dissolving the current structure.
But we have to confront their defined endgame.
We have to. The accelerationist endgame, systemic collapse that leads to a post-human future where human agency just doesn't matter anymore.
Which means they risk replacing one form of control with another one that's potentially even more absolute.
And that is the ultimate warning here. The sources even cite Jordan Peterson's warning that this radical pursuit of control, it risks becoming tragic proof that all power will eventually and always corrupt. By seeking this absolute technological control, a kind of godlike power, to dismantle the old system, zero work risks falling into a cyclical trap.
Where the new bosses are just like the old bosses.
Their new, efficient, technologically mandated clarity could easily become a new, more efficient form of oppression. The new architects replace the old ones, but the dynamic of control remains exactly the same.
So we've mapped out these external forces, these hyperstitional control systems. Now we have to shift. We have to go to the internal architecture, to the mind, which is, I mean, it's the ultimate battleground.
It is.
And the sources introduce a genuinely radical idea here. Consciousness itself as a geometrical matrix in hyperdimensional space. This goes way beyond metaphor. They're claiming this has mathematical rigor.
This is where we move into the domain of non-local consciousness research. The sources propose that consciousness can be modeled not just metaphorically, but mathematically as a geometrical matrix.
And the mechanism they use to model a profound shift in perception is based on a transformation called circle inversion.
Or inversive geometry, yes.
So we need to unpack that. How does a geometric transformation model a shift in consciousness?
Okay, so imagine a reference circle on a plane. When you apply the inversion transformation, you get a precise, mathematically rigorous one-to-one mapping.
Okay.
Any point inside that circle is mapped to a specific new point outside the circle, and conversely, any point outside is mapped back inside.
And the edge of the circle.
The points on the edge of the circle, they act as a boundary or a threshold that remains fixed. It doesn't move.
So the shift isn't just turning things around, it's a measurable, specific transformation.
Exactly. And this transformation provides a non-metaphorical lens for looking at profound altered states. It rigorously models the transition that's described in research involving substances like DMT.
This is the DMT decoupling protocol they talk about.
That's it. This transition is understood as the shift from our embodied local consciousness, that's the inside of the circle, our everyday filtered awareness, to a non-local consciousness state, which is the outside, the mirror world, or the inverted configuration. This mirror world is understood as the geometrically structured, neurologically correlated, outside state of consciousness's usual inside state.
Okay, that's still pretty abstract. Where does the physical reality meet this geometry? What's the hardware for this hyperdimensional matrix in our brains?
This is where the sources connect the geometrical model to something called the PSUMO framework.
PSUMO.
The primordial superfluid substrate. This framework tries to integrate the crucial quantum biological processes that will be necessary to actualize such an inside a living warm system like a brain.
What kind of processes are we talking about?
They cite things like biophoton networks, which is light being used to orchestrate tissue dynamics, and the established quantum states in the microtubules inside our neurons.
So PSUMO is providing the quantum biological hardware, the physical medium, that lets the geometric structure of consciousness be manipulated, and that leads to the internal shift described by circle inversion.
It attempts to ground the radical geometry in the wetware of the brain.
It moves altered states out of mysticism and into engineering.
That's the goal. It tries to provide a verifiable mechanism, and that provides the basis for the internal toolkit of liberation.
Okay, so let's move from that huge macro architecture to the micro-level operating system that we use every single day. And that brings us to Maxwell Maltz and the self-image.
Maltz is fascinating. He was a plastic surgeon, and he noticed that patients who received these profound physical transformations, life-changing surgery, they often retained their negative self-perceptions.
So the outside changed, but the inside didn't.
Exactly. And he realized that our self-image, it's not just an idea we have about ourselves, it functions as a highly precise servo mechanism, a guidance system.
Like the gyroscope in an automated weapon.
Perfect analogy. It automatically and unconsciously steers us toward whatever reality we hold to be true about ourselves, whether that image is one of success or failure or illness or health.
And the fundamental insight that gives this whole system its power is the suggestibility of our nervous system.
That is the critical vulnerability that the external architects are constantly trying to exploit. The sources state it unequivocally. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real one.
Which is a terrifying and powerful idea.
It is. It reacts physiologically, emotionally, chemically to whatever we vividly think or imagine to be true. If you vividly imagine being humiliated, your body produces the cortisol and the anxiety that are associated with a real threat.
So we're essentially all the time in a state of self-hypnosis.
Dictated by the mental images we feed ourselves, yes.
And the story of Mr. Russell from the source material, it illustrates the devastating power of this.
The case of Mr. Russell is clinical proof of hyperstition operating internally. He was convinced he was cursed. He believed a minor scar tissue knot on his leg was a dangerous sign of voodoo.
And this false belief held deeply enough.
It caused dramatic, rapid physical deterioration. His body was literally acting out the curse.
Until a doctor convinced him it was false.
When a doctor provided medical evidence that convinced him the curse wasn't real, he recovered almost instantly. The false gnosis, the false internal certainty, had created a tangible, physical, internal reality. Our internal beliefs are our most volatile and powerful programming.
And this suggestibility, it makes us incredibly vulnerable to external narratives that tap into the deepest structures of the mind, which brings us to the archetypes described by Carl Jung.
Absolutely. Jung argued that our minds are constantly vulnerable because these deep unconscious forces, these inherited universal blueprints known as archetypes.
The wise old man, the shadow, the great mother.
Right. They can be activated by political symbols, by cultural narratives, or by charismatic figures.
And what's the mechanism of that activation? What does it feel like?
When an archetype gets activated, it floods the ego with an unshakable feeling of rightness and righteousness.
And that conviction is so primal, so deep.
It bypasses all logic, all rational defenses. This is why certain cults or political ideologies are so resistant to factual debate. The belief isn't intellectual, it's an archetypal certainty.
And this is where the shadow comes in, our disowned negative qualities.
Which is almost universally projected onto external enemies, onto other groups, onto rival political parties. And that projection fuels mass delusion and makes any genuine collective problem solving functionally impossible.
So we had this architecture of control. Powerful external forces engineering reality through linguistic and bureaucratic trauma, distinguish between vivid imagination and objective truth. The sources warn that control societies risk achieving a complete self-sealing stability.
A state where the attenuation of variety becomes total.
Where the possibility of change, the ability to build a different world, just evaporates.
And to prevent that stability from becoming permanent, liberation requires a dual vector intervention. You have to work on both at the same time.
The external system and the internal observer.
Exactly. So first, the external toolkit, cybernetics. Stafford Beer, the father of management cybernetics, he advised that frontal political assaults often fail because you're playing by the system's own rules.
Oh, it's good.
Instead, you use cybernetic principles to dissolve problems. You do this by building resilient, decentralized alternatives where liberty is the output.
Which means we need to talk about the law of requisite variety.
Yeah.
This seems to be the core principle of cybernetic resistance.
It is, precisely. Control systems, whether they're governments or algorithms or bureaucracies, they all operate by limiting the system's variety.
And variety is just the number of possible states or solutions or choices available to people.
Yes. A centralized system wants to limit your choices to make you predictable and controllable.
So how does the law of requisite variety offer a solution to that?
Well, the law states that to effectively manage or control a system, the controller has to have variety that is equal to or greater than the variety of the system being controlled. So in social terms, to defeat a centralizing power, the strategy has to be to radically amplify the variety of the system.
Which means building resilient, decentralized local alternatives.
Highly redundant networks, diverse belief systems. If the complexity and variety of the social fabric exceed the regulatory capacity of the central authority,
Then centralized control becomes functionally impossible.
and liberty naturally emerges as the only possible output of that system.
Okay, so that's the external fight. Systemic complexity as a defense. What about the necessary internal toolkit? Consciousness retuning.
This is the internal work, the shamanic vector. It's necessary to make sure that when we're fighting the external illusion, we don't fall victim to our own internal self-deception.
It's about gaining internal clarity.
Perceiving the engineered reality for what it is. And this involves accessing a direct, intuitive knowing, what the sources call gnosis, that moves past the narrow, highly filtered reality our everyday consciousness gives us.
And this is where Maltz's work moves from just being a diagnosis to being a highly practical, actionable program. How do we start this process of internal dehypnosis and reprogramming?
Maltz provides 3 essential steps. The first is to challenge false beliefs. You have to become a ruthless detective of your own mind.
Actively questioning the limiting beliefs and assumptions you hold about yourself.
Yes. Don't just ask if the belief is true, ask why you believe it. For example, why do I actually believe I'm incapable of achieving X? You have to look for the evidence, or more often the lack of evidence, that justifies that limiting self-image.
And what happens when you really challenge that belief?
Maltz suggests that this challenge often stirs up a kind of righteous indignation, the feeling of being falsely limited.
And that internal fire.
That indignation is a powerful liberator. It provides the emotional fuel you need to break the self-imposed hypnosis and reject the limitations of the old servo mechanism.
Okay, so the second step leverages the nervous system's suggestibility that we already talked about. Practice mental practice.
Right. Since your nervous system can't distinguish between a vividly imagined event and objective reality, you have to deliberately leverage the theater in your mind.
So daily, you form a detailed, vivid mental image of the self you want to be.
Or the desired outcome. Picture yourself performing successfully, operating with confidence, achieving the goal. By feeding your nervous system this constant stream of positive, functional data, you are literally reprogramming the servo mechanism. You're encoding the desired reality.
And finally, there's protecting the mind from the constant influx of external suggestions and narratives.
You have to adopt this crucial conscious filter. It ain't necessarily so. It's a deliberate pause.
So when you get incoming messages, a criticism, a piece of shocking news, a political headline, a deep-seated fear, you stop.
You stop and you analyze it before you allow it to trigger an emotional response, a limbic hijacking. This practice asserts you intellectual sovereignty. It prevents self-deception from solidifying around external misinformation, and it allows you to choose your response rather than just automatically reacting to a hostile program.
So the grand synthesis here is the union of these two powerful, necessary vectors.
Absolutely. Cybernetics gives you the necessary external toolkit for fighting engineered control systems by increasing systemic variety.
And consciousness retuning provides the necessary internal clarity to ensure you're not fighting one illusion just to step willingly into another one.
It's the only way to ensure you move from being the passive product of a hostile program to becoming the active architect of clarity. And that's how you prevent control from achieving that self-sealing permanent stability.
We have completed a very deep dive through some incredibly high-stakes terrain today. We've mapped the powerful external forces that are engineering our consensus reality, from the hyperstitional strategies of zero work to the bureaucratic negrado of Project 2025.
And we also explored the profound internal mechanisms, Maltz's servo mechanism, Jung's archetypes, geometric consciousness, that really determine whether these external programs trap us or whether they grant us the necessary agency to act.
The central tension we've really uncovered is this profound central paradox of our time. The most potent danger isn't in overt oppression. It lies in our own susceptibility to self-deception.
The sources just warn again and again of the danger of constructing our own cage by choosing the comfort of servitude over the rigorous, arduous work of internal and external freedom.
So our call to you is one of active discernment. Recognize that the world is being constructed and reconstructed constantly. You need to practice linguistic honesty, apply interpretive disobedience to external narratives, and critically engage with the architecture that is shaping both your perception and your reality.
And we'll leave you with this final, powerful thought, which stems from the devastating power of the Maltz principle combined with that cynical, accelerationist worldview. If your nervous system cannot tell the difference between something you vividly imagine and objective reality, and if, as these philosophies suggest, objective truth is a lie, there is only conviction, then we have to ask the critical question. What world are you coding into existence right now through your deepest beliefs and your unwavering focus?